After recently finishing Silent Hill 2 Remake, which I thought was a great game, I began thinking about how good it was and why other games don't get remade. That was when I suddenly remembered how many remakes and remasters we've gotten over the course of this generation. It seems like every couple months some game is getting remade or remastered, and it doesn't matter if it released 2 years ago or 20 years ago, anything is fair game to get a remake. However, the problem is everything is not fair game. Now this could just be me, but it feels like too many times we've gotten remasters or remakes for games that technically could go without one. A perfect example of this is the Horizon Zero Dawn remaster. Yes, I'm not gonna lie and say the game doesn't look better, it definitely does, but did we really need it? For someone like myself who already platinumed the game, why would I pay the $10 to upgrade a game I've already fully completed? It makes no sense. On top of that, Sony could have took that manpower and remade a game that actually needed to be remade, like they did with Demon's Souls. Granted, I wasn't a fan of that game, but I won't deny that the game is absolutely stunning, with it looking like a completely new title from the PS3 version. And it doesn't stop there. There's other games that have been remade that actually needed the remake. Some include Resident Evil 4, the first Dead Space, Final Fantasy VII, just to name a few. But even with what we've gotten, I wanted to bring up the question, what is the real criteria that must be met to justify remaking a game? At first it seems like a simple answer, but when you think about it, it's not black and white. Some games need remade, but the issues why can vary. It could be because of graphics, or it just needs a whole slew of quality of life changes, but it really depends on the type of game in regards to what should be overhauled. Personally, I think, at least in 2024, the first area where you should look at when considering a game to be remade is how old it is. There are so many games from PlayStation 1 all the way to PlayStation 3 that could use a remake, especially PS1 and PS2. And it's not even the obscure games, there are games from popular franchises that could be remade and modernized for current day gamers. For example, a game that I only briefly played, a Dino Crisis remake would be absolutely incredible. Currently, there are no other games that are like it. Sure, there's games that take elements from it, but how many games do we have today where you can die from dinosaurs? The only game that I can think of that's popular that even has dinosaurs is Ark, and that's a completely different game. Imagine if Capcom remade the Dino Crisis games similar to the Resident Evil games. With that amount of detail and fidelity, so many gamers like myself would be throwing our money at them as soon as they reveal the release date. Move on to the PS2, and Devil May Cry, another Capcom title, could get a remake. Having just went through this series myself, there is without a doubt no reason why this game could not get a remake. And if not one, maybe you could remake two since so many people seem to shit on it. Even Devil May Cry 3, which many people consider to be the best of the initial trilogy, could use a remake, even if it's simply upgrading the graphics. Regardless, DMC 1 through 3 could all be remade, but it hasn't been done yet. For PS3, the first Assassin's Creed definitely needs a remake. I played a handful of these games but never tried out the first. Especially considering the sheer amount of games that are in this series, remaking the first could be a great way of getting new people to try out the franchise and maybe touching up some things that Ubisoft wasn't able to get the first time around. With Assassin's Creed, there's so many games to choose from, you can't go wrong with remaking any of the old ones. No matter what generation you choose to remake a game from, I think the bigger issue is that these companies are ignoring franchises that have been dormant for years. In an era of gaming where all we get is remasters and remakes, what sense does it make to remake a game that released during the PlayStation 4 generation? Anything before then I can see because it's been 11 years since the PlayStation 3 gen technically ended, so I think it's justified. But nowadays where I heard getting remasters and remakes for games in the PlayStation 4 gen, how many times have we gotten The Last of Us 1 remastered or remade? Grand Theft Auto 5. Now Horizon. It's like Sony has tunnel vision and just wants to release the same games over and over, generation after generation. What boggles my mind the most is how blind these companies are to what the consumers want to be remade. How can a company whose sole purpose is to generate profit and gain a bigger customer base fail to listen to those customers? Because as much as people want to lie and say, man, nobody cares about remasters and remakes, just give me the new games. As soon as a franchise that you like gets remade, then it's okay. But if it's something you don't care about, then it's irrelevant. A perfect example of a game that would sell like crazy if it got a remaster or remake is Bloodborne. Technically, this goes against what I just said of not remastering games from the last generation, but it's been so long since Bloodborne released and we haven't even gotten a remastered version of the game that you might as well remake it. People would buy a remaster, but if you actually remade it, it would sell even more copies. And that's just a Souls game, which isn't everybody's cup of tea. Now let's switch gears. Nowadays there isn't enough competitive shooters that can stand up to Call Call of Duty to get an actual footing in the industry. Sony could remake SOCOM, which hasn't had a new entry since 2011, give it updated graphics and overhaul everything to make it a legit competitor to COD, and I bet so many people will eat it up. Of course, just like everything in life, there's always the unknown. Nobody truly knows what will happen next, as you can only predict and forecast what is expected to happen. It is a possibility that these remade games flop, but that right there leads to another problem. I am extremely confident that these studios judge if these games should get remade or not based solely on their potential profit. Otherwise, we would get a lot more remasters and remakes of franchises that have been gone for a long time. A great example of this is the Jak and Daxter franchise. This is my second favorite franchise ever, and it hasn't had a game in so many years. You would think that Naughty Dog would return to it, right? Wrong. Okay, we'll sell the IP to another company that can do it justice, right? Wrong. Instead, they choose to acknowledge its existence but refuse to do anything to keep it relevant, just sitting on it pretty much. You have dedicated fans who have made PC ports for the Jak games, with 1 and 2 being finished and 3 on the way. Yes, it's not a remake, but for franchises with multiple entries, you could always remake one of them and see how it performs before doing the rest. I get it, money is the most important thing because without it, you can't get anything going. But it's like the studios are afraid to remake games and take chances creatively because they're scared of it not being this super big blockbuster that can be milked for years to come. I just look at this entire remake remaster situation and think, why allocate resources to remaking titles that don't really need them? And I'm just a normal guy speaking behind a microphone. So if I can see this, why can't the companies that own these studios see the same thing? It makes no sense. If you started playing games at least during the PS3 generation or before, I'm sure you have your own list of games that you think should be remade. Hell, you might even have entire franchises. Personally, I'm one of those people that is completely fine with remakes as long as it's justified. Just look at Silent Hill 2. That game released on the PS2, and without hesitating, I knew that it made sense to remake it. Even with how well PS2 games age, I get the reasoning. On the other hand, I don't understand why Silent Hill 1 was skipped over when that game is older and released on the PS1. Even if the sequel is more popular, if you're going to remake a game from an iconic franchise, start with the one that kicked things off. If I had to nail it down to what is required for a game to be remade, it would have to be the release year, graphics, and controls. The reason I say that is because all three of them go hand in hand. Usually an old game has bad graphics and bad controls. It's during the PS2 and PS3 gen where that line gets blurry, because a lot of games still hold up and don't need to be remade. But simply doing remakes on the sole basis of how much money they can generate shouldn't be the only thing to consider. Otherwise, we're going to keep getting remakes of games we've already played and get the same experiences over and over, when we should take advantage of the tech we have to redo some of the games the way the creators had always envisioned. Thankfully, some of these remakes have been so much fun and show that remakes are definitely worth it, but too many times we've had situations where it's just like, what are we doing? Does this really need a remake? In an industry that seems creatively bankrupt, I don't understand why the concept of remaking games that call for them is so hard to grasp. You need more franchises to make more money, and what's a better way to get that money than to revive a franchise and remake it, especially if the game did well years ago and it wasn't due to the times. Like a game that sold well back in 2004 might not sell well in 2024, even with a remake. If it doesn't have anything specifically that caters to that era, which is the reason why it sold well, then I don't see the problem. Working in business myself, I do realize that a lot of these decisions are made by the upper management of these companies, but any good business person would take a look at their customer base and evaluate them based on things like purchasing habits, their social media presence, and the average age of the consumer base in that niche. Just doing a bit more research before greenlighting a game for a remake would give other titles that desperately need one a better chance than I'm sure they're getting. Overall, I can't stand seeing when games that don't need a remake get one. Thinking about what constitutes a remake versus what doesn't really opened my eyes to some of these decisions that the companies are making when picking one. You'll realize how many series have been neglected over the years and see how much the bottom line drives all these decisions. I hope that when the well gets dry from making sequel after sequel for the same franchises, or if there's an industry shift, that studios will be able to take a chance and remake a game that they're truly passionate about, not the one that's going to generate the most profit for the business. If they're passionate about the title and it makes the best sense financially, then I'm all for it. But for now, it just seems like that is not always the case. When do you think a game should be remade? Do you look at when it released, its mechanics, or something else? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to check out one of my other videos right here.